For years, he was just a spectator in his own family. But one unexpected conversation sparked the flame of courage. Now, amid judging glances and broken family ties, he's about to risk everything for love. Welcome to the channel. Before we begin, like and subscribe so we can keep creating stories like this one. Grace Mendoza arrived at Blackwell Estate with a modest suitcase and eyes that carried more questions than answers. She came from Riverside, a small town in Florida where everyone knew everything but nobody talked about anything. Accepting the position as head housekeeper at the residence of Victor Blackwell seemed like the perfect opportunity to start anew. The taxi dropped her off in front of the imposing entrance to the estate. A limestone portal framed the property that extended beyond what her vision could distinguish. Climbing bougainvillea added a touch of crimson to the dominant ochre of the colonial construction. "Welcome to Blackwell Estate, Miss Mendoza," Mrs. Eleanor greeted her, an elderly woman with a bearing that revealed years of service in the main house. "Mr. Blackwell is waiting for you in his office." Grace nodded, following the woman through an extensive hallway decorated with contemporary American artwork. Each step on the polished terracotta floor resonated with the promise of a new life. "Elegant, discreet, highly capable," Eleanor listed as they walked. "The selection committee was very demanding, but you stood out among all the candidates. The position you will occupy requires extreme trust." "May I ask what happened to my predecessor?" Grace inquired with a soft but firm voice. Eleanor slowed her pace. "Miss Caroline Rivers left her position without much explanation, just a formal and silent letter." She paused significantly. "After 15 years of impeccable service, her departure was unexpected." Grace perceived something in Eleanor's tone, a mixture of respect and wariness that didn't go unnoticed. The estate was more than a mansion. It was a fortress of serene appearance, where small gestures revealed immutable hierarchies. Victor Blackwell's office was a spacious room with large windows that offered a privileged view of the blue agave fields stretching to the horizon. The man, about 50 years old, stood up when he saw her enter. His presence commanded respect, but his smile conveyed a certain warmth. "Miss Mendoza, welcome to your new home," he extended his hand. "I trust your journey from Florida was pleasant." "Thank you very much, Mr. Blackwell. The trip was smooth and the beauty of Kentucky is impressive." The man nodded, pleased. During the next hour, he explained in detail her responsibilities as the main housekeeper of the estate. Grace would be in charge of supervising the domestic staff, managing the maintenance budgets, coordinating social events, and, most importantly, being Victor's right hand in everything related to the internal functioning of the property. "Discretion is fundamental in this house, Miss Mendoza," Victor emphasized. "I have important business in the bourbon industry and receive very influential people. I need to be able to fully trust the person who manages my house." "I completely understand, sir. Confidentiality has always been my priority in previous jobs." What Grace didn't mention were the real reasons for her move to Kentucky. She thought she was finally free from a past that always threatened to resurface. A past linked to administrative accusations in her previous employment at the Florida municipality, which, although archived due to lack of evidence, had stained her reputation in the small town. That night, after settling into her new room, an elegant suite located in the east wing of the estate, Grace silently walked the corridors, familiarizing herself with every corner of what would be her new domain. The kitchen, spacious and equipped with the latest technology, contrasted with the colonial style of the rest of the house. There she met Rose, the head cook, a robust woman with an easy smile who offered her a lemon balm tea. "To calm the nerves of the first day," she said with complicity. "We all feel them when we arrive here." Grace accepted the infusion, grateful for the gesture of kindness. "How long have you been working for the Blackwell family?" "Almost 20 years, Rose answered with pride. "I saw Miss Elizabeth, Mr. Blackwell's daughter, grow up. Now she's studying in New York City, but returns for vacations. She's a charming young woman, although lately she's been somewhat distant with her father." Grace nodded, absorbing every detail. As housekeeper, she needed to know the family dynamics to perform her function correctly. "And Mrs. Blackwell?" she asked. noticing the absence of family photos in the house. Rose's face darkened. "Mrs. Margaret left us 7 years ago. A sudden illness," she lowered her voice. "Mr. Blackwell was never the same again." The conversation was interrupted by the entrance of Henry, the head gardener, a middle-aged man with calloused hands and a penetrating gaze. "So you're the new Caroline," he said, sizing her up with his eyes. "You have big shoes to fill." "Miss," Grace maintained her composure, holding his gaze. "I don't pretend to be Caroline. I bring my own experience and work style." Henry let out a dry laugh. "We all say that at the beginning," he commented enigmatically, before pouring himself a glass of water and leaving the kitchen. Rose shook her head. "Don't mind him. Henry was very close to Caroline. They worked together for years." Grace nodded but kept that information in mind. It was evident that the shadow of her predecessor was still present on the estate. As she prepared for bed, she mentally reviewed her first day. Mr. Blackwell seemed to respect her, and despite being surrounded by advisors and assistants, he had shown special deference to her during the introduction to the staff. However, she had also noticed suspicious glances among some older employees. Whispers that ceased when she approached. No one replaces such an influential figure without paying a price, she thought. That night, when opening the drawer of the bedside table to store her watch, she found something that left her cold, a small silver brooch in the shape of an agave plant. She recognized it immediately, as it was identical to the one that appeared in the only photograph she had seen of Caroline Rivers, in a small portrait in the personnel office. The message was clear. She wasn't as far away as everyone thought. Grace's first week at Blackwell Estate passed between accelerated learning and necessary adjustments. Mr. Blackwell had given her the account books, the master keys, and the authorization to review all contracts with suppliers. Little by little, she began to understand the intricate system that kept functioning that small, self-sufficient city that was the estate. The blue agave fields extended like a turquoise sea under the Kentucky sun. The distillery, located a kilometer from the main house, was the beating heart of the family business. Blackwell Bourbon, a premium brand with international recognition, represented not only the main source of income for Victor, but also a legacy of 5 generations. It was precisely during a routine inspection of the warehouses when Grace had her first direct encounter with staff resistance. "These records don't match the physical inventory," she pointed out to Matthew, the warehouse manager, a man with a stern face and an evasive look. "There's a discrepancy of almost 20 barrels in the last quarter." Matthew shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "These are the records Miss Caroline gave me. Perhaps you should ask her." The defiant tone didn't go unnoticed by Grace, who closed the record book firmly. "Miss Caroline no longer works here, and these are my records now. I want a complete and updated inventory by tomorrow." She walked away with a determined step, aware of the looks behind her back. It wasn't the first time she had felt that silent resistance. Small gestures, incomplete tasks, withheld information. Everything indicated that some staff members remained loyal to the former housekeeper. That night, while reviewing documents in her office, a soft knock on the door interrupted her concentration. It was Dolores, one of the younger maids. "Miss Grace, I found this while cleaning the West Wing." She handed her an ivory-colored envelope. It was behind one of the paintings, as if someone had hidden it. Grace took the envelope with curiosity. It had no sender or recipient. She thanked Dolores and waited to be alone to open it. Inside, she found a sheet of paper with elegant and precise calligraphy containing a single phrase: "You shouldn't be here." Grace's stomach contracted. She immediately recognized that curved stroke in the signature, at the end of the note, Caroline Rivers. Only she would know about that particular way of writing her R's, a detail she had noticed in documents signed by the former housekeeper. Trying to stay calm, she kept the note in the drawer of her desk and continued with her work, but her mind wouldn't stop spinning. Why would Caroline have left that message, or had someone placed it recently? The most disturbing thing was that only one person could know her deepest secret, the one she most feared would come to light. The next day, during breakfast, Grace decided to approach Mrs. Eleanor, the person who seemed to have the most information about everyone on the estate. "Can I ask you something in confidence?" she inquired, after making sure they were alone in the small staff dining room. The older woman nodded, serving herself more coffee. "What do you really know about Caroline Rivers' departure?" Eleanor put the cup on the table and looked at the door before speaking. "What I know is that she didn't leave of her own free will." She lowered her voice. "One morning, Mr. Blackwell called her to his office. The meeting lasted more than 2 hours. When she came out, her face was pale. The next day, she presented her resignation letter. Was there any specific conflict?" Caroline had been asking questions. Eleanor leaned in more. Questions about maintenance contracts, about certain suppliers that appeared in the books, but that no one knew. She kept the domestic accounting, you know, and she was extremely meticulous. This revelation lit an alert in Grace. Had Caroline discovered administrative irregularities within the estate itself? "And do you know where she is now?" "Officially, she returned to New York City with her family." Eleanor made a significant pause. "But Henry has seen her in Bourbon Creek, in town. It seems she never really left." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mr. Blackwell, who entered the dining room with an energetic step. "Good morning, ladies," he greeted cordially. "Grace, I need you to personally supervise the preparations for the visit of the Japanese investors this weekend. It's crucial that everything is impeccable." "Of course, Mr. Blackwell. I'll take care of every detail." The man smiled, pleased. "I knew I could count on you. I'm glad to see how quickly you've adapted to the estate." That seemingly innocuous comment didn't go unnoticed by Eleanor, who gave Grace an eloquent look. The growing trust between her and Mr. Blackwell was generating resentment. That afternoon, while supervising the cleaning of the main hall, Grace noticed a presence at the entrance. A woman in her 40s, elegantly dressed, was watching her with intensity. "You must be the new housekeeper," she said with a voice that tried to be friendly, but failed to hide a certain coldness. "I'm Sarah Vega, a close friend of the family." Grace approached with a professional smile, extending her hand. "Grace Mendoza, nice to meet you. Can I help you with something?" Sarah briefly shook her hand. "I was just passing by to visit Victor." She made a studied pause. "We've known each other since college. We're practically family." There was something in the way the woman emphasized that last word that put Grace on alert. "Mr. Blackwell is at the distillery at the moment, but I can let him know you're here when he returns." "That won't be necessary." Sarah surveyed the room with her gaze as if evaluating the changes. "I know this house like the back of my hand. Caroline and I were good friends, you know. A shame what happened." "What exactly happened?" asked Grace, trying to maintain a casual tone. Sarah smiled enigmatically. "Let's just say there are secrets in this estate that are better not to unearth." She turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "A piece of advice, Miss Mendoza. Some positions are not meant to be occupied for long." The encounter left Grace with an uncomfortable feeling. It was evident that Sarah Vega had some kind of connection with Caroline and possibly knew the reasons for her departure. That night, while reviewing the preparations for the investors' visit, she found a discrepancy in the maintenance expense records. A considerable sum had been allocated to renovations at the distillery the previous year, but when visiting the facilities, there was no evidence of such improvements. When she confronted Robert, the financial administrator, he avoided giving her a clear answer. "Those documents were personally approved by Mr. Blackwell," he replied dryly. "It's not appropriate for you to question his decisions." "I'm not questioning Mr. Blackwell," Grace replied firmly. "I'm doing my job, which includes understanding every dollar that enters and leaves this estate." Robert looked at her with a mixture of surprise and wariness. "You're following exactly in Caroline's footsteps," he murmured, "and you saw how she ended up." That night, upon returning to her room, Grace found her computer turned on, although she was sure she had turned it off before leaving. As she approached, she saw that someone had left a file open. It was a copy of Caroline Rivers' employment contract, with a confidentiality clause highlighted in yellow. The message was clear. Someone was watching her, someone who had access to her room and wanted to remind her of the limits of her position. The visit of the Japanese investors was a resounding success. Grace had orchestrated every detail with millimetric precision. From the decoration with motifs that combined traditional American and Japanese elements to a menu that fused flavors from both cultures, specially created by Rose under her direction. Mr. Blackwell was lavish with praise when the visitors left. "You have exceeded all my expectations, Grace," he told her, as they shared a glass of aged bourbon in his office. "Your organizational ability is impressive." Grace thanked for the compliment with a modest smile. "I'm just doing my job, Mr. Blackwell." "And you do it extraordinarily well," the man swirled the amber liquid in his glass, thoughtful. "You know, I'm considering making some changes in the administrative structure of the estate." He looked up, meeting Grace's attentive eyes. "Changes. That would give you greater autonomy and authority. I think you've proven to deserve it." The news should have filled her with satisfaction, but Grace felt a growing unease. Greater authority also meant greater visibility, and possibly greater resistance from those who remained loyal to Caroline. "It's an honor to have your trust," she responded cautiously, "although I'm concerned that some employees may resist these changes." Mr. Blackwell made a gesture dismissing her concern. "Whoever cannot adapt can always seek employment elsewhere. This estate needs to move forward." The conversation drifted to more mundane topics, but Grace couldn't stop thinking about the implications of what she had just heard. If Mr. Blackwell was planning a restructuring, it was likely that more people would see their positions threatened, which could accelerate the conflict with the shadow she felt stalking her. The next day, while reviewing correspondence in her office, Dolores entered hurriedly. "Miss Grace, there's a woman waiting for you at the main entrance. She says she needs to speak with you urgently." "Did she tell you her name?" Dolores shook her head. "She only said she was an old friend of yours from Florida." Grace felt the color drain from her face. She wasn't expecting visitors from her hometown, especially not after how she had left things there. With apprehension, she headed toward the main entrance. The woman who waited for her had her back turned, observing the gardens. Upon hearing her steps, she slowly turned around. Grace held her breath as she recognized her. It was Caroline Rivers. "Miss Mendoza," she greeted with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We finally meet in person." Caroline was exactly as she appeared in photographs, an elegant woman about 50 years old, with an impeccable posture and a penetrating gaze. She wore a beige suit that highlighted her olive skin. "Miss Rivers," Grace responded, maintaining her composure despite the surprise. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." "I imagine not." Caroline looked around with familiarity. "This place has been my home for 15 years. One doesn't easily detach from homes." There was something threatening in her casual tone that put Grace on maximum alert. "What can I do for you?" Caroline looked her directly in the eyes. "We could talk in a more private place, don't you think?" Without waiting for an answer, Caroline began walking toward the back gardens with the certainty of someone who knows every corner of the place. Grace followed her, aware that several employees were observing the scene with evident interest. They stopped next to the central fountain, a space open enough to be visible from the house, but far enough away to maintain a private conversation. "I'll get to the point, Miss Mendoza," Caroline began. "You occupy a position that rightfully belongs to me." "I understand that you submitted your resignation voluntarily," Grace replied calmly. Caroline let out a dry laugh. "We both know that in this life, few things are truly voluntary." Her expression hardened. "I was forced to resign after discovering certain irregularities in the administration of the estate. If you have any complaint about your dismissal, you should speak with Mr. Blackwell directly." "Oh, but that's precisely what I want to avoid." Caroline took a small envelope from her purse. "You see, during my years here, I collected certain information that could be very detrimental, not only to Mr. Blackwell, but also to you." Grace kept her face impassive, although she felt her heart racing. "Are you trying to blackmail me?" "I prefer to call it a negotiation." Caroline put the envelope away again. "I have documents that link Mr. Blackwell to questionable financial practices, and I also have very specific details about a certain incident at the Florida municipality that involves a young and promising administrator named Grace Mendoza." The impact of her words was like a physical blow. How could Caroline know about that episode from her past? The accusation of embezzlement of municipal funds in Florida had been archived for lack of evidence, but the mere fact that it had been formulated had been enough to push her to seek a new life away from there. "I don't know what you're talking about," she tried to maintain her composure. "We both know you do," Caroline smiled smugly. "My proposal is simple. Submit your resignation for personal reasons before the end of the week. I'll recover my position and these documents will never see the light of day. And if I refuse, then I'll be forced to share this information with Mr. Blackwell and subsequently with the corresponding authorities." Caroline shrugged. "It would be a shame if your career ended in such an abrupt manner." Before Grace could respond, Victor Blackwell's voice resonated from the terrace. "Caroline, what an unexpected surprise." The man approached with a determined step, his face a mask of cordiality that didn't completely hide his bewilderment. "Victor, darling," Caroline immediately changed to an affable tone. "I was passing by and couldn't resist the temptation to visit my old home. Your new housekeeper has been very kind in receiving me." Mr. Blackwell looked at Grace with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "I hope Grace has offered you something to drink. Why don't you join us for a bourbon on the terrace?" The invitation sounded more like an order than a suggestion. Caroline accepted with a calculating smile. As the three headed toward the house, Grace felt how the ground she had gained in recent weeks began to wobble beneath her feet. During the next hour, she observed how Caroline deployed all her charm before Mr. Blackwell, reminiscing about anecdotes from her years on the estate and asking apparently innocent questions about recent changes. She was a consummate strategist, thought Grace, studying each of her movements. "I've been collaborating with some bourbon warehouses in Bourbon Creek," Caroline commented casually. "It's fascinating to see different approaches to production, although none with the tradition and quality of Blackwell, of course." "You'll always be welcome to visit our distillery," Mr. Blackwell responded, although Grace noticed a certain reservation in his voice. "Although I'm surprised you've developed so much interest in the process. You never showed much inclination toward that aspect of the business." "Circumstances force us to develop new interests." Caroline shot a fleeting glance at Grace. "When doors close unexpectedly, one must learn to open windows." The conversation continued along increasingly tense paths, with barely veiled hints that Mr. Blackwell seemed to perfectly capture. When Caroline finally announced her departure, the relief was palpable in the environment. "It has been very illuminating to see you both again," she said goodbye, shaking Mr. Blackwell's hand. "Grace, I hope you consider our previous conversation. You have until Friday." When Caroline's car moved away down the driveway, Mr. Blackwell turned to her with a grave expression. What conversation was she talking about? Grace took a deep breath. She was at a crossroads. Revealing the blackmail attempt would also mean exposing her own vulnerable past. "Caroline suggested that I consider my position here," she responded cautiously. "She seems to think her departure was unjustified." Mr. Blackwell studied her in silence before speaking. "Caroline Rivers was an exceptional employee for many years," he finally said, "but she began to exceed her functions, investigating matters that didn't concern her." He made a significant pause. "I trust you know how to recognize those limits, Grace. Loyalty is the quality I value most in those around me." The message was clear. There was an invisible line she shouldn't cross if she wanted to maintain her position. The problem was that Grace had already begun to see disturbing patterns in the financial records, patterns that coincided with what Caroline had insinuated. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. Caroline's threats resonated in her mind as she reviewed every possible scenario. If she resigned, she would be giving in to blackmail and losing the opportunity to redeem herself professionally. If she stayed and Caroline fulfilled her threat, she could lose everything again. She needed to understand exactly what Caroline had discovered that caused her departure. Only then could she anticipate her movements and perhaps find a way to neutralize her threats. At dawn, she made a decision. She would investigate discreetly. She couldn't trust anyone within the estate, except perhaps Rose, the cook, who seemed to have no alliances with Caroline and had been kind since the first. During breakfast, Grace made sure to stay alone with Rose in the kitchen. "I need your help," she said in a low voice. "But it must stay between us." Rose looked at her with curiosity while finishing washing some fruits. "What's going on? You seem worried." "It's about Caroline Rivers." Grace chose her words carefully. "I think she discovered something before, leaving something related to the finances of the estate." Rose's expression subtly changed. Her normally jovial face acquired an unusual seriousness. "You shouldn't stir those waters, Grace," she murmured, getting closer so no one else could. "Hear them." Caroline was more than the housekeeper. She knew all the secrets of this house, even those that Mr. Blackwell would prefer to keep hidden. "What kind of secrets?" Rose looked nervously toward the door before continuing. "Weeks before her departure, I heard her arguing with Robert about ghost suppliers, companies that billed services to the estate but that no one knew." She made a significant pause. "When I asked her about it, she told me she had discovered an irregular pattern in the payments, large sums that left the estate toward companies that only existed on paper." This revelation confirmed Grace's suspicions. Caroline hadn't been fired for exceeding her functions. She had been silenced for discovering what appeared to be a scheme to divert funds. "Do you know if she kept copies of those documents?" "Caroline was always cautious," Rose responded. "She had a safe in her room, behind a painting. When she left, the safe was empty, but I saw her meet with Sarah Vega the day before her departure. She gave her a package. I always thought they could be those documents." The mention of Sarah Vega lit a light in Grace's mind. Mr. Blackwell's close friend hadn't appeared by chance the day before. If she had the documents that compromised Mr. Blackwell, she could be both a potential ally and an additional threat. That same day, taking advantage of Mr. Blackwell having traveled to Louisville for a business meeting, Grace decided to check Caroline's old room, now converted into a small study. As Rose had mentioned, she found the empty safe behind a painting of the Virgin Mary. However, when examining the space minutely, she noticed marks on the floor under the desk, as if something heavy had been dragged. She carefully moved the furniture and discovered a loose board in the floor. Lifting it, she found a small hidden compartment containing a black notebook. Upon opening it, her heart skipped a beat. It was Caroline's personal diary with detailed annotations about her suspicions and discoveries. The pages revealed how Caroline had identified 3 ghost companies that regularly received substantial payments for services never provided: Blue Agave Consultants, Valley Distillers, and La Rocha Transport. All of them shared the same P.O. box in Bourbon Creek and had been constituted by the same notary, a certain Attorney Mitchell, an old friend of Mr. Blackwell. Even more disturbing, Caroline had written, "VB receives 60%, while RF manages the operations. Sarah acts as an intermediary. The funds end up in accounts in the Cayman Islands." The initials left no room for doubt. VB must be Victor Blackwell, and RF, Robert Fisher, the financial administrator. What Caroline had discovered was a sophisticated money laundering scheme. Grace carefully kept the diary in her purse and returned the room to its original state. Her mind was working frantically, evaluating her options. Now she had a clearer idea of what Caroline had discovered, but that only put her in greater danger. That afternoon, while reviewing correspondence in her office, Dolores entered hurriedly. "Mr. Blackwell has just arrived and requests your immediate presence in his office," she informed with a worried expression. "He seems upset." With her heart beating rapidly, Grace headed to the office. Had Mr. Blackwell discovered her investigation, or perhaps Caroline had already fulfilled her threat? Upon entering, she found Mr. Blackwell standing in front of the window, his gaze fixed on the agave fields. Without turning around, he spoke with a controlled but tense voice. "I just received a very interesting call from the Bourbon Regulatory Commission," he said. "Apparently, someone has sent them a detailed report on alleged financial irregularities in our estate." He slowly turned to look at her. "The report bears your signature, Grace." She felt the ground opening beneath her feet. It was a perfect trap. Caroline had sent a falsified complaint with her name, fulfilling her threat before the established deadline. "Mr. Blackwell, I assure you that I haven't sent any report," she responded, with all the calm she could gather. "I would never do something like that." The man studied her in silence, as if evaluating the truthfulness of her words. "The signature was identical to yours, and the report included details that only someone with access to our internal records could know." "They're trying to incriminate me." Grace decided to take a risk. "I believe Caroline Rivers is behind this." Mr. Blackwell raised an eyebrow. "Why would Caroline do something like that?" "Because she wants to recover her position." Grace took a breath. "She threatened me yesterday during her visit. She said she had compromising documents about you and about me." A shadow crossed Mr. Blackwell's face. "What kind of documents did she mention?" "She didn't go into specific details," Grace lied, aware that revealing her knowledge about the money laundering scheme would be too dangerous at that moment. But she insinuated that she had discovered administrative irregularities before her departure. Mr. Blackwell walked slowly to his desk and poured himself a bourbon. "Caroline was always meticulous to the point of obsession," he said after a sip. "Her attention to detail was admirable, but also dangerous when applied to matters that didn't concern her." He offered a glass to Grace, who accepted it, although she had no intention of drinking. "There are aspects of the bourbon business that require administrative flexibility," Mr. Blackwell continued, with a casual tone that contrasted with the gravity of his words. "Certain practices that, seen from the outside, could be misinterpreted." Grace held Mr. Blackwell's gaze, understanding the true meaning behind his words. He was practically confirming Caroline's accusations. "I need to know which side you're on, Grace," Mr. Blackwell continued. "Business requires absolute loyalty, especially in positions of such trust as yours." She made a decision in that instant, to feign ignorance and buy time. "My loyalty is with you and with the estate, Mr. Blackwell," she responded firmly. "But I cannot defend what I don't know. If there are aspects of the business that I should understand better to protect your interests, I need to be informed." Mr. Blackwell studied her for a long moment, as if calibrating to what extent he could trust her. "The bourbon industry is subject to strict and complex regulations," he finally said. "Sometimes, to maintain competitiveness, it's necessary to optimize certain administrative processes." "I understand," Grace nodded, maintaining a neutral face. "No, you don't understand yet," Mr. Blackwell emptied his glass. "But you will. Meanwhile, I need you to handle this situation with the Regulatory Commission. Explain to them that the signature was falsified and that we are willing to fully cooperate with any investigation." "Of course." "And regarding Caroline," his voice acquired a harder tone, "let me take care of her. You should have no more contact with that woman, is that clear?" Grace nodded, although she knew the warning came too late. She was already immersed in a dangerous game between Caroline and Mr. Blackwell, and any wrong move could be catastrophic. That same night, while dining alone in her room, she received a message on her phone from an unknown number. "Greenhouse, 10 p.m. Come alone." There was no signature, but Grace suspected it must be Caroline. At 10 o'clock sharp, she headed to the greenhouse located at the east end of the gardens. It was an elegant structure of glass and wrought iron, full of exotic plants and aromatic herbs used by Rose in her culinary creations. The moonlight filtered through the transparent roof, creating mysterious shadows among the vegetation. To her surprise, it wasn't Caroline who waited for her, but Sarah Vega. "Thank you for coming," the woman said, emerging from among the plants like an apparition. "I'm sorry for the mystery, but the walls in this estate have ears." "What do you want from me?" asked Grace, maintaining a certain distance. "To warn you," Sarah came closer. "You're in danger, Grace, greater than you imagine." "Why should I trust you? You're friends with Caroline, the woman who's trying to destroy me." Sarah sketched a sad smile. "Appearances deceive. My relationship with Victor and Caroline is complicated." She paused. "I met Victor in college, it's true. We were more than friends for a time. When Margaret, his wife, fell ill, he sought me out again." "Were you lovers?" Grace asked directly. "We were until I discovered the truth about his business." Sarah looked around nervously. "Caroline discovered it too. It was no coincidence that both of us were pushed away almost simultaneously." What truth did you exactly discover? Sarah extracted a flash drive from her pocket. It's not just money laundering, although that would already be serious enough. Her voice lowered to become a whisper. Margaret's sudden illness wasn't natural. Grace felt a chill run down her spine. Are you suggesting that Mr. Blackwell— I don't have conclusive evidence, Sarah interrupted. Just suspicions based on conversations I overheard and medical documents that seemed altered. But Caroline was convinced. She was very close to Margaret, practically her confidant. If that's true, why didn't Caroline go to the authorities? Because she needed irrefutable evidence. And because, like you, she has a vulnerable past that Victor could exploit. Sarah handed her the flash drive. Here is all the information that Caroline collected on the ghost companies and irregular financial movements. There are also copies of emails between Victor and certain doctors before Margaret's illness. Grace took the device with trembling hands. Why are you helping me? If Caroline wants to recover her position, this only strengthens me. Sarah looked at her intensely. Because Caroline doesn't really want to return. What she wants is justice, and you could be the path to achieve it. She paused. Besides, we investigated you before you were hired. We know that the accusations against you in Florida were fabricated by a boss who wanted to cover up his own embezzlements. You're honest, Grace, and that's what we need now. Before she could respond, they heard footsteps approaching the greenhouse. Sarah tensed. You must go. Use that information wisely, and remember, don't trust anyone within this estate. Grace quickly left through the back door of the greenhouse, hiding the flash drive in her pocket. As she returned to the main house, through a side path she saw Henry the gardener heading to the greenhouse. Had it been a coincidence, or was he monitoring her movements? During the next 2 days, Grace carefully analyzed the information on the flash drive. The documents confirmed everything Sarah had said, an elaborate scheme of ghost companies, transfers to offshore accounts, and disturbing communications between Mr. Blackwell and certain specialist doctors weeks before Margaret presented the first symptoms of her mysterious illness. She also found something unexpected, an old photograph of Caroline with Margaret. On the back, an inscription: "To my dear sister Caroline, my strength and my refuge. With love, Margaret." The revelation was shocking. Caroline wasn't simply the housekeeper. She was Mr. Blackwell's sister-in-law, the sister of his late wife. That explained why she had occupied such a prominent position on the estate and why her dismissal had been so traumatic. As she reflected on these revelations, Grace received a call from the estate's receptionist. "Miss Mendoza, there are 2 people from the Bourbon Regulatory Commission at the entrance. They say they have an appointment with you." Grace hadn't arranged any appointment. She immediately understood that Mr. Blackwell must have arranged this meeting, possibly to test her. "Send them to the small living room, please. I'll be there in 5 minutes." Quickly, she hid the flash drive in a secret compartment of her watch, a gift from her father that had a small hidden space behind the face. While she wouldn't be able to access the information during the meeting, at least it would be safe. The commission representatives turned out to be an older man with a severe expression and a young woman who constantly took notes. They introduced themselves as Mr. Ortega and Ms. Vargas. "We appreciate your availability, Miss Mendoza," Ortega began. "As you know, we have received disturbing information about certain irregular financial practices on this estate." "I'm aware," Grace responded calmly. "And I can assure you that the document you received with my signature is a forgery. Someone is trying to discredit me." "Do you have any idea who might be behind this?" asked Vargas without lifting her gaze from her notebook. "I have my suspicions, but I'd prefer not to make accusations without conclusive evidence." Grace chose her words carefully. "What I can tell you is that I'm willing to fully cooperate with your investigation. Transparency is a fundamental value for Blackwell Estate." The meeting continued for an hour, during which Grace had to carefully balance her apparent cooperation with the protection of her real knowledge about the illicit activities. At the end, Ortega handed her a formal summons. "We'll need to review the complete financial records of the last 3 years," he noted. "We'll return next week with a larger team." When the inspectors left, Grace found Mr. Blackwell waiting for her in the hallway. His face was inscrutable. "How was the meeting?" he asked in a casual tone. "Professional," she answered. "I assured them the complaint was false and offered our full cooperation." "Excellent," Mr. Blackwell nodded. "Just what I expected from you." He paused before adding, "By the way, we'll have a small dinner tonight. I've invited some close friends, including Sarah. I'd like you to personally supervise all the details." The implicit message was clear. He wanted Grace to be present, during dinner, probably to observe her interaction with Sarah. It was another test of her loyalty. "Of course, Mr. Blackwell, I'll take care of everything." That afternoon, while coordinating the preparations for dinner, Grace received a text message from an unknown number. "Don't come tonight. It's a trap." "See?" The warning was cryptic but clear. Caroline was trying to warn her about some danger related to the dinner, but should she trust her? Or was it another manipulation in this complex game of deception? She decided she couldn't risk ignoring the warning, but she also couldn't simply absent herself without raising suspicions. She needed a strategy that would allow her to participate in the dinner, but stay alert and protected. With this purpose, she went to the only person she believed she could partially trust, Rose. "I need you to do me a favor," she told her discreetly while they reviewed the menu. "If something strange happens during tonight's dinner, anything out of the ordinary, I want you to immediately call this number." She handed her a paper with the phone number of a former colleague from Florida whom she fully trusted. "What kind of strange things?" asked Rose with concern. "Tense conversations, suspicious. Behaviors," Grace hesitated before adding, "or if my glass or my plate are served differently from the rest." Rose looked at her alarmed. "Grace, do you fear that someone might try to—" "It's just a precaution," she interrupted. "It's probably nothing, but I prefer to be prepared." The cook nodded gravely. "You can count on me. I'll keep my eyes wide open." The dinner began punctually at 8. The main dining room of Blackwell Estate sparkled under the candlelight, and the flower arrangements carefully selected by Grace. She had set the table for 6 diners: Mr. Blackwell herself, Sarah Vega, Attorney Mitchell, the notary mentioned in the documents, and a married couple named Chapman, apparently old friends of the family. Grace had dressed with elegance, but sobriety. A navy blue dress that allowed her to move with ease while supervising every detail of the service. She wore her watch with the hidden flash drive and had taken an additional precaution, programming her phone to record the entire conversation during dinner. Mr. Blackwell presided over the table, displaying his usual charm. At first glance, it seemed simply a social gathering among longtime friends, but Grace perceived undercurrents of tension, especially between Mr. Blackwell and Sarah, who maintained a cordial smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Grace has completely revitalized the administration of the estate," Mr. Blackwell commented as they served the first course. "Her efficiency reminds me of you, Sarah, in your best times." The comment, seemingly innocuous, had a tone that Grace interpreted as a veiled warning. "It's always refreshing to have new blood," Sarah responded with equal ambiguity. "Although, sometimes inexperience can lead to unexpected stumbles." The conversation flowed between superficial topics and shared anecdotes, but Grace remained alert, observing each interaction, each exchanged look. Following her instinct, she avoided drinking from her glass unless everyone else did simultaneously, and only took small sips. It was during the main course, a traditional beef Wellington masterfully prepared by Rose, when the conversation took an unexpected turn. "You know, I was reviewing some old documents," Attorney Mitchell commented with false casualness, "and I found something curious about a municipal employee from Florida, a certain Grace Mendoza who faced embezzlement accusations a few years ago." A tense silence took over the table. Mr. Blackwell looked at Grace with intensity, as if evaluating her reaction. Sarah maintained her composure, though her knuckles whitened around her fork. "What a coincidence of names," Grace responded calmly, holding the notary's gaze. "Although I'm afraid Mendoza is quite a common surname in America." "Of course," Mitchell smiled without joy, "although coincidences are sometimes revealing. This woman, for example, was exonerated after the main witness against her mysteriously changed his statement. It was a direct provocation. They were exposing her vulnerable point, trying to destabilize her." Administrative corruption cases tend to be complex, Sarah intervened, surprising everyone. Often the true culprits have the power to divert attention toward innocent subordinates. I've seen similar situations in my work as a financial advisor. Mr. Blackwell narrowed his eyes, perceiving the implicit alliance between the two women. Speaking of coincidences, he said, twirling his bourbon glass between his fingers, I received a very interesting call this afternoon. Apparently, someone accessed my personal emails from several years ago. This revelation made Grace feel a chill. Had Mr. Blackwell discovered the flash drive? Or perhaps Caroline had made some move on her own? Digital privacy is increasingly difficult to maintain, Mrs. Chapman commented, apparently oblivious to the undercurrents of the conversation. My daughter always warns me about hackers and such things. I don't think they were hackers, dear. Lucy, Mr. Blackwell responded without taking his gaze off Sarah. Rather someone very close with a very specific agenda. The tension was palpable. Grace observed how Rose, who was serving dessert, exchanged a significant look with Henry, who had silently entered the dining room and remained near the door. Something was about to happen. At that moment, Grace's phone vibrated. It was a message from Caroline. Leave now. Everyone is in danger. Without time to question the warning, Grace quickly improvised. Excuse me? She stood up with a professional smile. I need to verify a detail with the service. I'll continue with you in a moment. She headed toward the door, but Henry stood in her way. Mr. Blackwell would prefer you to stay, Grace, he said with a threatening tone. The conversation is just starting to get interesting. Let her pass, Henry, Mr. Blackwell's voice sounded, calm but authoritative. I trust Grace will return soon. Each other gardener reluctantly moved aside. Grace went out to the hallway and quickly headed to the kitchen, where she found Rose with an anguished expression. Something strange is happening, the cook whispered. Henry and Robert have been acting weird. All night. I saw them talking secretly in the back garden, and then Robert left with a briefcase. Where is he now? In Mr. Blackwell's office, I think. It seems they're destroying documents. This information confirmed Grace's fears. Mr. Blackwell was eliminating evidence, probably preparing to flee or for some desperate action. At that moment, the lights throughout the estate flickered and went out, leaving them in complete darkness. For a few seconds before the emergency lights activated. What's happening? Asked Rose, alarmed. I don't know, but we must act quickly, Grace made a decision. I need you to call the police immediately. Tell them it's an emergency. While Rose took out her phone, Grace cautiously returned toward the dining room. On the way she heard altered voices coming from Mr. Blackwell's office, she silently approached the partially open door. It's madness, Victor, it was Mitchell's voice. We can't simply disappear like this. The Regulatory Commission is already investigating, and if we flee now, we'll only confirm all suspicions. And what's your brilliant alternative? Mr. Blackwell responded with a tense voice. Wait for them to find the transfers? Trust that Grace hasn't already discovered the truth about Margaret. Grace held her breath. Mr. Blackwell had just implicitly confirmed what Sarah had insinuated about his wife's death. We could divert attention, suggested Robert, whose voice sounded nervous. Make Grace appear responsible for everything. With her record in Florida, it would be believable. It's too late for that, replied Mr. Blackwell. She's been asking too many questions, reviewing records that no one should touch. And now this. Your alliance with Sarah. No, we must act tonight. Grace silently moved away from the door. She needed to alert the guests and get them out of the estate before something serious happened. As she turned down the hallway, she came face to face with Caroline. I finally found you, the woman said urgently. We have to leave now. I've alerted the state prosecutor's office. They'll be here in 20 minutes, but we can't wait that long. Grace studied her quickly. Caroline seemed genuinely concerned, with no trace of her initial hostility. Why should I trust you? A few days ago, you were trying to destroy me. Because we both want the same thing. Justice. Caroline looked at her with intensity. Margaret was my sister. Victor poisoned her slowly to keep her part of the estate. I've spent 7 years trying to prove it. The message you sent me, you shouldn't be here. It wasn't a threat, it was a warning, Caroline explained. No one is safe near Victor when he feels cornered, and now he's exactly at that point. The sound of breaking glass interrupted their conversation. It came from the dining room. "Sarah!" they exclaimed in unison, running there. The scene they found was chaotic. Mr. Blackwell was holding a gun pointing directly at Sarah. Mrs. Chapman was screaming while her husband tried to calm her. Henry was blocking the main door. "How timely, Caroline," Mr. Blackwell said with a cold voice when he saw them enter. "The entire conspiracy gathered. Now, give me the flash drive and your phones, all of them." Grace stepped forward, trying to buy time. "Mr. Blackwell, this will only worsen your situation. The police are already on their way." "Shut up!" he shouted, his face contorted with anger. "You were perfect, Grace, an ideal suspect with a stained past. But you had to be so correct, so honest. Like Margaret," Caroline intervened. "She also discovered your money laundering schemes, didn't she? That's why you had to silence her." Mr. Blackwell let out a bitter laugh. "Margaret was weak. She wanted to report me, do the right thing." His voice was imbued with contempt. "This estate, this empire, I built it. She just inherited a name." That moment, Rose appeared at the back door of the dining room. Seeing the situation, she intentionally dropped a metal tray. The clatter momentarily distracted Mr. Blackwell, who diverted his attention toward the noise. Taking advantage of that instant, Sarah lunged at him, deflecting his arm. A shot was heard that hit the ceiling. Grace reacted quickly, throwing a wine bottle at Henry, who was preparing to intervene. The heavy glass hit him in the shoulder, making him stagger. A struggle ensued for control of the gun between Mr. Blackwell and Sarah. Caroline joined them, trying to immobilize her brother-in-law. In the midst of the struggle, a second shot was heard. Everyone froze. Mr. Blackwell stepped back with an expression of disbelief. The bullet had grazed his arm, causing a superficial but bleeding wound. "It's over, Victor," Caroline said firmly. "The prosecutor's office has all the documents. The emails about the doctors you manipulated, the transfers to offshore accounts, everything." The sound of sirens in the distance confirmed her words. The police were arriving. Mr. Blackwell seemed to deflate before their eyes, all his arrogance dissolving in an instant. He dropped the gun, which Grace quickly picked up. "You were the best housekeeper I had, Caroline," he said with a defeated voice. "And you, Grace, could have been too." 3 days later, Blackwell Estate buzzed with the activity of forensic investigators and federal agents, reviewing every document, every record, every corner of the property. Mr. Blackwell, Robert, and attorney Mitchell had been arrested, charged with multiple financial crimes. The investigation into Margaret's death had been reopened, with new toxicological tests ordered to examine her remains. Grace was in the garden, contemplating the agave fields stretching to the horizon, when Caroline approached her. "The judge has appointed a judicial administrator for the estate," she informed, "but they've requested that you continue as housekeeper during the transition. It seems your reputation has been completely restored." Grace nodded, grateful for the recognition. "And you? Will you return to your old position?" Caroline shook her head. "My time here is over. I need to close this chapter of my life, now that Margaret will finally have justice." She paused. "But before I leave, I wanted to apologize for threatening you. I was desperate. I understand. I would have done the same for my family." Grace looked at her with curiosity. "There's something I still don't understand. How did you discover my past in Florida?" Caroline smiled slightly. "Actually, it was Sarah who initially investigated you. When Victor announced he would hire a new housekeeper, we knew he would look for someone with some vulnerability that he could manipulate. So Sarah obtained the list of candidates and traced their backgrounds. To use it against me if necessary," Grace concluded. "To protect you," Caroline corrected. "When we discovered that your accusations had been fabricated, we knew you were exactly the person we needed. Someone who understood the value of truth, even when the price is high." Grace reflected on this revelation. All this time she had believed she was alone, fighting against invisible forces, when in reality she had been part of a larger plan to bring justice. "What will happen now with the estate?" she asked. "Elizabeth, Victor, and Margaret's daughter will inherit everything," Caroline responded. "She's an upright young woman, very different from her father. I'm sure that under her leadership, the Blackwell legacy can be cleansed." As the two women contemplated the sunset over the agave fields, Grace felt a deep sense of peace. She had come to Blackwell Estate seeking a new beginning, fleeing from an unjust past. Instead, she had found an opportunity to completely redeem herself, to prove that truth, despite all obstacles, always finds its way to the light. "You know," Caroline said softly, "Margaret always said that the right people arrive at the exact moment, even if we don't always know why they're there." Grace smiled. For the first time in a long time, she no longer felt the weight of a threatening past on her shoulders. The future opened before her, as wide and promising as the blue fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Grace and Caroline has moved you. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it here by clicking to your left. If you like this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and second chances. Don't miss our upcoming content, where we'll continue